Arriving on his chosen planet by drop pod, Olaf installed the terraforming unit immediately, setting up to turn any nearby sand into soil. The terraforming unit required both silver and chem fuel to power it, and it only came preloaded with enough to terraform a small area. However, with the silver he earned from the resort, he would be able to fuel the terraformer. Thus, as more guests arrived, the area would become more beautiful, thus encouraging even more guests to visit. It was the perfect cycle of capitalism in action. First things first though, if he was to survive long enough to get customers, he would need a few things. Food, for sustenance, shelter, to protect him from the toasty temperatures, and power, to feed his mechanical friends. Being a mechanitor, Olaf had brought a number of mechanoids with him to help with some of the more manual tasks, allowing him to spend more time entertaining the guests. His initial cadre included a lifter, a constructor, an agri-hand, and a tunneler. He began by setting out a few planting zones for the agri-hand. Sand doesn't make for the best of growing environments, so until he could terraform enough land to farm, the agri-hand would have its hands, or scythes, I guess, full with creating sustenance from the desolate land. Olaf instructed the agri-hand to work a strip of cucumber and a strip of butternut squash. The cucumber would grow quite quickly, but provide little nutrition. However, it should be enough to see him through until the much more nutritious, but longer growing, squash was ready. Given the deserty nature of the area, there isn't an abundance of wood to use for construction, so Olaf decides that his first move should be to create a bench where he can start cutting bricks from stone. While he cuts them, the constructor and the lifter can work together to build the shelter. It's a match made in heaven. Given the necessity of the mechanoids, as well as his desire to live a life of relative luxury, Olaf decides to set up a small field of solar panels to start providing electricity. He decides to start with 3 panels, based on absolutely no calculations, just a gut feeling that this seems like the right amount. While the initial setup is happening, the terraformer has been slowly working away, converting a few patches of nearby sand into soil. This soil will be incredibly limited in the early days of the resort, until they get more terraforming done, so Olaf takes some time to ponder what to grow on it. With the bricks beginning to flow into their storage pile, Olaf instructs the mechanoids to build a small shack to protect their batteries from the elements, and, most importantly, a bedroom for him to rest in. Determined to speed up the process of getting himself a bed, Olaf even briefly joins in the construction efforts to help move things along. With his bedroom set up, albeit a very basic one for the time being, the next step is to set up some charging ports for the mechanoids to ensure that they keep ticking along. Olaf decides to build a small room next to his which will accommodate all things mechanoid for the whole resort. With the rest of the base taking shape, Olaf solidifies the stockpile by creating an actual structure around it to protect the equipment from the elements. Watching the Constructoid take a few days to simply build basic furniture in his bedroom, Olaf decides that wood will be an essential for the resort after all, as it will allow them to quickly build quality furnishings to help get things off the ground. As such, he elects to use the small area of terraformed soil to grow some fibre corn. Fibre corn only produces a small amount of wood, but over time they can build up quite a stockpile, which should help them expand the resort quickly. With the first cucumbers coming in soon, they will need a freezer to store them and other foodstuffs, along with a kitchen in which to prepare the meals. So, with the tunneler sitting dormant, Olaf decided to put it to work expanding their area, digging these spaces out of the small hill they'd already begun to set up in. As the work is progressing, Olaf hears a weird skittering noise in the distance and sees a number of particularly pissed off iguanas approaching the base. Given his high-mate nature, he abhors violence. So he hides inside and tells the mechanoids to smush all the iguanas while he covers his ears and pretends he can't hear it all happening. Although none of the mechanoids are designed for combat, with a little tactical positioning, utilising the bulk of the tunneler for extra smooshing power, along with the fact that iguanas are surprisingly smooshable, the mechanoids swiftly eradicate the menace. With the new areas carved out of the mountain, they ran cables through to the freezer to power it and the new electric stove. It wasn't exactly the cleanest of food preparation stations, but that would come with time. The important thing was that now Olaf had somewhere where he could heat his cucumbers before he slurped them down. Which I guess is better? Somehow? With the freezer and kitchen set up, Olaf did a quick sweep to make the place more hygienic. Given that the toxic waste that the mechanoids produced had to be stored in the freezer next to the food, it was debatable how worthwhile the cleaning was. But hey, at least it looked tidier. Given the beating that a bunch of rowdy iguanas had given his mechanoids, Olaf decided it was time to set up a mech gestator, so that he could expand the numbers of his mechanoid horde, ideally to include some combat mechs. With all three basic needs now set up, Olaf decided it was time to start researching. He knew he wanted to build a resort here, but there was a lot he'd need to learn to get things going, such as creating activities for the visitors to do, learning how to create things they might want to buy, and figuring out the best way to get people here in the first place. With this in mind, he rearranged his bedroom so that he could fit a research table in there where he could start his plans. With the mech gestator finally finished, Olaf began gestating a Militor. It wouldn't provide much in the way of combat prowess, but at least it was equipped with a weapon, which was more than could be said for his current cohort of mechs. With his research bench complete, Olaf had to decide what he wanted to research first. He contemplated a few options. Beer brewing perhaps, to entertain the guests? Or perhaps carpets, to improve the quality of the resort's guest rooms? Perhaps even Devil Strand, so that they could sell fancy clothes to beat the heat. In the end, however, he elected to go for a more boring but sensible option: biofuel refining. Through running the resort, he would bring in silver to power the terraformer, but it would also require chem fuel, and he'd be able to run it a lot more consistently if he was able to produce the fuel himself, instead of relying on traders to supply it. Unfortunately, given that he was still quite new to the whole mechanator thing, Olaf hadn't realised that the tunneler he'd brought along didn't quite fit into the charger that he'd made. As such, it had collapsed in a cave while out mining steel for him, and there was little to be done for other than to let it lie dormant, until it regained enough power through natural causes to walk itself back to the base. As the team were busying themselves finally adding floors to the base, and Olaf was researching, the Militor was finally ready. So Olaf cracked open the gestator and allowed it to charge. Given that it couldn't do manual labour, it would most likely lie dormant until it was needed to defend or attack. With all of the essentials up and running, Olaf decided that it was time to start thinking more about setting up the resort. He hadn't given much thought to the design, but he figured that, as he would want a lot of guest rooms, it made sense to build one to begin with that he could use as a template for the others. With this in mind, he began planning out a basic level room for the resort, a little bit away from the area they currently had set up. The area they'd currently set up would be well suited to the back end of the resort, where all the nitty gritty of running the place happens, away from the sight of the guests. Things had clearly been going a bit too well for the resort, as Olaf began to hear the distinct clatter of approaching rattlesnakes. A whole bunch of them had entered the area, determined, he figured, to feast on his flesh. The tunneler and its mighty smooshing power were still out of commission, but now that they had the Militor, Olaf was confident they could make it through the attack without much risk. He once again had the mechanoids take advantage of the choke point in the settlement, this time with the basic mechs protecting the Militor, so that it could fire away at the snakes from safety. The plan worked out a treat, with even the turtle, which had decided to join their group, getting in one little snap at one of the snakes towards the end. Olaf was getting confident. Surely there was nothing on this planet that could pose a danger to him and his small army of mechs. No sooner had this thought crossed his mind than a local emu went mad and decided to attack them as well. Olaf chuckled as he began to dream of having emu for dinner. In his confidence, he forewent the usual defensive positions in favour of simply sending the Minotaur to deal with the bird. His confidence was rapidly humbled, however, as the emu kicked the poor Agrihan to a swift and brutal death. The Minotaur was next. Being unable to fire upon the bird once it had closed the distance, it soon hit the ground, leaving Olaf to cower in his storeroom, suddenly certain that the emu would be enjoying him for dinner instead. It was at this moment, as Olaf panicked, trying to think of ways out, that a true hero of the story stepped in. The desert tortoise that had decided to join them emerged from their storeroom and began nibbling the shit out of the emu. Thanks to its hardened shell and its extra nippy bites, the tortoise managed to succeed where the mechs had failed and take down the emu. Olaf hadn't given the tortoise much thought before this, but he promised to nurse it back to health as thanks for its heroic actions. Looks like emu is back on the menu, boys. With the battle over and the cleanup underway, Olaf made sure to chuck the Agrihan back in the gestator to resurrect it. Producing sustenance from the sand was hard, back-breaking work, and he'd be damned if he was going to be the one to do it. As Olaf was about to head to sleep, he received a message from a person named Coyote asking if they could take refuge at the resort for a while. Olaf hadn't particularly felt like the mechanoids needed any help with their manual labour, but he would undoubtedly need some humans to do things the mechs currently couldn't, so figured he might as well welcome Coyote into the team, for the time being. When she arrived, Olaf grilled Coyote about her skills, and quickly learned that they left a lot to be desired. For the time being, however, she could help the mechs with construction, and her social skills were quite exceptional, so once guests began to arrive, she could help Olaf entertain them. And besides, any old idiot could cut bricks, and there was no shortage of that needing done. As if she was determined to prove what a terrible choice Olaf had made in accepting her, Coyote almost immediately suffered from a mental breakdown, which she decided to handle by eating every piece of their very limited food supplies in the space of a few hours. With the model guest room almost done, all that was left to do, for the moment, was to run electricity out to it, and they would theoretically be ready for their first guests. Theoretically, because for the time being, it would unfortunately need to serve as Coyote's bedroom, until they could build her a new one. Deciding that the current kitchen and freezer are only really suitable for preparing food for the workers and not the guests, plus the fact that the current freezer is likely to be overflowing with toxic waste soon, Olaf decides to start planning out their resort in earnest, starting with a restaurant, which will be connected by a short kitchen section to a large new walk-in freezer. The plans aren't necessarily short-term ones, but having the blueprint in place should allow him to start thinking about the locations of other amenities. Despite the joy of seeing his creation begin to appear before him, tragedy is never far off on the Rimworld, and, sure enough, a hungry lion decides that it wants to make a meal of the group's heroic, emu-killing tortoise. Olaf sends the Minotaur out, and with a swift warning shot to the lion's ear, he believes that he scared it away. However, as Olaf approaches to tend to the tortoise, the lion doubles back and finishes the deed. Shocked and saddened by the loss which has occurred right before his very eyes, Olaf instructs the Minotaur to fire upon the lion once more, landing just enough hits to leave it bleeding out in the desert. And once the desert takes it, then Olaf shall feast upon it the way it had the tortoise. And the hits don't stop there. The next day, Coyote reveals themselves to be a traitor, clearly only here to eat all of Olaf's food, and then hogtie his mechanoids for fun. Thankfully, Coyote's stupidity works in their favour, as despite having seen it in action numerous times, she underestimates the Minotaur, which slowly but surely wears her down until she has the good grace to die. The upside of this betrayal is that the guest room is now free. To cheer himself up, Olaf slaps a price of $30 on the room and waits for the guests to start pouring in. That night, as he slept, Olaf heard a knocking at the door and went to investigate.
Mama. Mama, mama. Mama, mama, mama. Mama, mama. Mama.
Clearly not convinced by Olaf's offer of discount tickets, a tribe of impids approaches the base with weapons in hand. Given that the tribe have approached a number of smaller groups, Olaf decides to collect together all the mechanoids, including the tunneler who has finally arisen from their slumber, and sets off to confront one of the smaller groups, before they all have a chance to converge on the settlement. Taking shelter behind the ruins of an old building, Olaf sends forth the tunneler to utilise its smooshing power, and the Minotaur to utilise its shotgun. The impids exhale fire in wide cones around them, but the mechanoids are not perturbed, and manage to make short work of the group. With one of the groups dealt with, the team intercept a poor tribesman who's been chosen to approach the settlement on his own. With all the mechanoids gang beating him, he goes down quick. He does then get up and try to run away, but given the damage done, he doesn't get very far. This leaves only the final group, who the team meet at their usual choke point. Although they make quick work of the first two attackers in this group, they do manage to set fire to their precious solar array before they go down. While the Minotaur spent an hour or two exchanging fire with the final impid, who was hiding in cover, the key solar panel succumbed to the fire, meaning that the whole grid was cut off. At this point in time, it was a minor issue and they could simply rebuild it, but it was a valuable learning experience for Olaf to build some additional redundancy into his systems. With his blood still high from the attack, Olaf decided he should send the Minotaur to deal with a couple of pests nearby. A Gila monster who had been eating their precious crops, and a Megascorpion who gave him the fear every time he saw it wandering by. Better to just be rid of both of them with a little targeted violence, he thought. This soon proved to be a little bit of a silly idea though, as the curse of the Agrihand struck once more. Enraged by the attempt on its life, the Megascorpion charged for the nearest target, the Agrihand, and ripped it to shreds before the Minotaur could stop it. It was back into the Gestator for yet another round of resurrection for the poor Agrihand. With some form of security now set up, along with the power supply, shelter and food, Olaf was well set up to start building the resort. And once he turned his attentions to it, it'd be a bustling tourist hotspot in no time. Hi guys, Tuna here, just wanted to drop in at the end of the video to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the first episode of this new series. If you're new here, I have a number of other series and one-off videos that you can check out, which should be on screen now. And if you want to be alerted when episode 2 of this series drops, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Until then, I hope life treats you with kindness. Bye bye!